This is For Your Info PODCASTZ, a production of Solutions by CAT. Welcome to a breakfast series by Assests Lancaster, transforming communities through business. This August 2015 installment is Opportunity for All. Thanks to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by CAT, marketing and advertising with passion. Enjoy the program.
So I'm going to ask the panelists to come up to the table, and I'm going to read their bios. They're all my good friends, but I'm still going to read the bio because I think it's important. So Marilee Souter, Dr. Stephanie Crumpton, and Fran Rodriguez. As Jessica said, my name is Angelica Arroyo, and I teach the Women's Leadership Circle at Assests Lancaster. And I also work part-time for the YWCA and own my own holistic coaching and consulting business. And it's my distinct pleasure to facilitate this conversation because it's one I'm very passionate about. And also my panelists and also Assests. So it's like, this is some good stew in here. And it's going to be great. And also talking about opportunity for all, we're recognizing that in order to do that, we need all the voices to be heard, which is the home point of that exercise. Not just heard, because we're not just talking this really cute, deep conversation and we do no action. We're talking about the action that accompanies personal, interpersonal, and communal transformation. And that is what becomes key and important to us. So I'm going to start with Fran Rodriguez. Fran joined the Lancaster County Community Foundation team in 2014 as the lead of the AHA Seed Fund grant-making scholarship program, volunteer recruitment, and to work with the Extraordinary Give. Fran has extensive background in community building, including being a founder of the Latino Empowerment Project and Lancaster Adelante Education Committee. Fran has spent the last 10 years working with and advocating on behalf of Latino-driven issues within Lancaster County and Pennsylvania. She has worked in the areas of public education, state government, and legal community. And she's also my homeboy. So thank you, Fran, for being here today. Dr. Stephanie Crumpton. Stephanie joined Lancaster Theological Seminary in fall 2014 from Salisbury, North Carolina. If I mispronounce anything, where you go? Carolina. Carolina.
I was just passing through. I'm not really from there.
This is going to be great. Where she was assistant professor of pastoral care and counseling at Hood Theological Seminary. Previously, she was an adjunct professor at Chicago Theological Seminary, a lecturer at Cano School of Theology at Emory University, and a teaching fellow at Atlanta's Interdenominational Theological Center. In Georgia, she has served as a state court advocate and consultant on the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. She is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. She received a Doctor of Theology, Pastoral Care, and Counseling from Columbia Theological Seminary in Decatur, Georgia. A Master of Divinity from Johnson C. Smith Presbyterian Seminary at the Interdenominational Theological Center, Atlanta, and a Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast Journalism from Oklahoma's Langston University. She also authored a book called A Womanist Pastoral Theology Against Intimate and Cultural Violence. So welcome. Also a homegirl. And Marilee Souter. Did I say your last name right there? Marilee worked as a newspaper reporter and editor for 10 years before starting her own corporate writing business, Souter Inc., in 1994. She writes for Fortune 500 corporations, government agencies, and healthcare systems. A Philadelphia native, Marilee lives with her family in Lancaster and is an active community volunteer. Currently, she is involved with social justice and sexual assault prevention work through the YWCA Lancaster. She also writes on a pro bono basis for the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape and PA Says No More. So welcome, Marilee. She's also a good friend. So I feel like as you're moving in community and sharing and growing, it's such a powerful thing to really build strong relationships with folks that are showing up and doing the work, right? It builds a support system. So I am glad to be here and facilitating this conversation. It's going to be phenomenal. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start with, we have 3 questions for our panelists, and each one will take a turn answering them. And then we'll kind of flow from there. Are we ready? Awesome. All right. So what has inequality felt like to you at a personal level?
Well, I have to admit, I'm still working through that. It's been both uncomfortable, yet inviting, because I always invite a challenge, whether it's personally or professionally. And it's also really forced me to create this coalition of either women or just people to walk with me. Because at the end of the day, we can't do this work alone. And I've never seen myself as being the sole soldier, but more so a part of a coalition. And it's just something I'm still working through.
What has it felt like? So I'm going to, I don't know, Linda, be very transparent. Inequality, when I have been on the receiving end of inequality, has felt like shame, right? This is kind of space in which you experience, I have experienced, not being in the right place for some reason that apparently was intrinsic to me. Before I really got in touch with what was really going on, it was just kind of this sense of, I'm not supposed to be here, but not really knowing why, and kind of feeling like there's something inside of me is the reason why I shouldn't be here. And so I would say it's been an educational journey to figure out, well, no, you had help feeling that way. So I think the biggest indicator of how it has felt has been a sense of shame, the sense of something not being right within me, but then realizing, wait a minute, I had help with that. So yeah, shame.
I think the first time that I really recognized that I had white privilege, although I didn't know that that was what it was at that age, was when I was in middle school, and one of my best friends was African American. And we would talk about different things and talk about our experiences, and she would stay at my house, which was in a white neighborhood, although it was in Philadelphia and I went to urban schools. And I would stay at her house and go to the African American church with her and do things. And she said to me one time, "What does this feel like to you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, you're, in this place with, and you're the only white person." And it was really one of the first, and then I said, "I really didn't think about it." And she said, "No, you don't need to, but I think about it every day." And so that was really the first time. And then I had a really close friend when I was in college, and we did a lot of things together. And he was a little bit older. I was an intern at the Wilmington News Journal, and he was a reporter. And we went a lot of places together just as friends. And we would go into places, and he would say, "Do you see people looking at us?" And having had white privilege, it never occurred to me that people were looking at us, and he would be able to identify that right away. So those were, in either of those, it was a lot later when I really started to study white privilege and recognize what that was. But I knew from some very close friends early on in some conversations that, that was something that I was experiencing, and these close friends of mine were in a different situation every day.
Right, so one of the things that have been really powerful is identifying the fact that social justice work, equity, equality, does not happen, if you will, on one dimension. It's not just whatever thing that we can come up with. our questions are shaped and formatted in a way that we're talking about the personal, the interpersonal, and the communal. Recognizing and honoring that it's a spectrum of work that needs to move forward. It's not just getting quality education going, because that doesn't shift the impact that somebody applying for a job and being, prejudiced or biased against someone's last name based on assumptions that have been silent on the wall for a long time, where there's no signaling for that, right? And so when we're looking at this, it's really important, if anything, that you walk away today understanding that there is no way to get at this idea of opportunity for all unless we are holistically looking at this, right? So it's personal, interpersonal, and communal. The work runs that spectrum as a social justice advocate and activist. And I'm sure you ladies agree as well, that it is a multi-spectrum. There's no just one, we're done, right? There's the internal work, there's the external work, and then there's the systemic stuff that we have to unpack, deconstruct, right? And so know that moving forward, that there's resources to also support that quality. What is missing, what is present, and where are we having success?
So the statement that you made earlier about the communal, the interpersonal, all of that intertwined together. My work in this community has been extremely personal. Every paid position that I've had has led me to work within the community. And those of you who know me in the audience know that I take my community work extremely seriously. It's almost like sustenance for me in terms of building others up so that more of us are at the table. And it's a great deal of work. I believe that a lot of the gray on my head is there because of the hard work that has entailed throughout the past probably 12 years in terms of the work that I've done here in this community. I feel grateful to what Lancaster County has provided me. A girl from Brooklyn who dropped out of high school and arrived here as a single mom. Doors were opened, opportunities were granted, and wow. But there are plenty of us out there who come from the same background who are not granted these chances, these opportune moments. And as far as I'm concerned, you have one chance. And if you screw that up, that chance may not arrive for a very long time. So I'm grateful for the doors having been opened, and I'm grateful that the support that's been lended to me and my programs, excuse me, has been pretty remarkable. However, where we're at now, I don't see a great deal of movement and support for broadening the opportunities, broadening the spectrum of social equity in this community. And I believe that most entities, be they government, public education, or the nonprofit world, that there's this sense that you do things once, you offer a chance to have a conversation once, and you're done. This conversation must happen repeatedly, ongoing. Every single day there has to be this kind of forum, open forum, for others to share a story and to share experiences. So we have a long way to go. I'm grateful at where we are, but there's still so much work to do.
When Angelique forwarded the question, the thing that stood out the most to me was the whole notion of allies and allyship, right? And so when you asked me about the interpersonal experience, where are we, where do we need to grow, and where is there a future, it's almost kind of like the thing that's great is also the thing that is difficult, right? And so becoming an ally, and I want to couch that, I want to be particular about how I talk about that. Everyone has a degree of power and influence somewhere, right? Now, when we look at society and culture, there are some who clearly, there are larger communities that have more affluence and influence and power and resources than others. Got it. And it's also important that everybody has a degree of power and influence somewhere. So everybody actually has the capacity to be an ally to someone else. The trick is, if you've been in a community that has been historically marginalized, you forget, and you have help forgetting that you actually have power. And so I think that's important because there are moments in which I have to remember, and also sometimes have to remind others, that as much as I need allies who are not like me, I am also in a position to be an ally to those who are not like me, right? And so within that whole notion of allyship, the great thing is that we're working towards being allies. The difficult thing is we're working towards being allies. It's a developmental process, right? Like you wake up one morning, the light comes on, and you're like, this has got to get different, and I have a role to play in it, and I can, and I am. Great, you show up for the work. And there are moments in which you still need to go further. And so some of my frustration, honestly, is I'm very clear that as an African-American woman, my work around internalized racism, internalized sexism, internalized homophobia, internalized classism, my work in my particularity as a Black woman is different from those who are my allies who come from different social locations. And so some of my frustration is I have to do my work on this side. I got to get myself straight, and then I got to go tend to the folk who are like me to help us externalize that. What I need for my allies to do is to do the same thing and go back home in their home communities and go speak back to their communities, right? Because my work is not the same, and I can't do someone else's work. But I also have an appreciation for the difficulty that is involved in going back and being disruptive in your home community because, truth be told, as I'm saying to my allies who are not like me, you go home and work on that. It's also difficult at times for me to go back to the African American community and try to work on stuff with us, right? Because it's ingrained, it's embedded. We live in a culture that does not let up around oppression and various expressions of oppression. So the difficulty is also the blessing. That allyship is a developmental process, and in as much as it is developmental, it's also frustrating. Where do I see where I am now and where we're working through that tension is the reason why I came to Lancaster, which is to teach at Lancaster Theological Seminary. We're in a space where we're trying to figure out who we've been in the past and where we want to go forward. We've been having conversations around race and violence that was the next step in some ongoing conversations, but they really kind of kicked up a little bit more publicly last year in response to the events in Ferguson, Baltimore, state of the country, unfortunately. And so I feel hopeful around that work, and I'm also sitting in the tension that comes with that developmental piece around my work that I have to do around internalizing stuff, work that my colleagues are doing around stuff that they've internalized, and then where we can meet in the middle and holding each other accountable with grace. Grace as in I accept you, accountable as in I accept you, and I'm also going to support you in being your better self.
Okay, so when I looked at this particular question, I really started to look at it again from a white person working in a white business world. One of the questions was, what do you feel is missing? And I do, in doing this social justice work and then also working in the business world at large corporations, small businesses, a wide variety, I often feel as though the white community does not fully understand or acknowledge that race is a social construct. So when I looked at this question, I thought, I'm going to look at some of the websites for some of my larger clients, two of which are local, one of which is a federal government client. And I went through the list of executives at the two large local clients, and every single one of them was white. I looked at the board of directors, and every single one of them was white. I went to the federal government client and looked on there, and every one of them was white. And so, I started to really think about the fact that in the course of my work day, I am working with people who have been in similar situations to me. And I really feel like that is a place that we can really look to have, there needs to be more diversity in leadership and really all the way through these organizations. So this is a client that I have, this federal government client. I was working on this for the last 8 months. I've been working on a employee handbook for them. So they sent me the human resources organization had put together everything that they wanted in this handbook. So I looked over the handbook, and then I was having the first conversation with them about everything. And so I said, what are the things that are important to your organization? What are the things that you want new employees to know? And they said, diversity is a really big thing. It's really important for us. And they went on and on about how important diversity was. And then at the end of their sort of spiel, I said, well, why is the diversity section that you have right now, the very last section, pages 68 to 70, if this is what is so important to you? And they said, well, it was literally after the reduction in force section. So it was literally after the section about people being fired from the organization. And when I asked that question, they all said, well, I don't know, that's where we put it. So we moved it up toward the beginning, and we really, talked a lot about that. So then it came back, after it had all been edited and written and everything, it came back from the graphic design department. And there were 5 pictures on the cover, and they were all white men. And I said, okay, how you're celebrating diversity with 5 pictures of white men? And no one, the graphics department, no one had caught it. It had gone through. So that's just one example of the type of work that we can do at, across the board in business to really be raising questions, and celebrating diversity and really working to reduce oppression, racial, sexist, ageism, all of that. So.
Very powerful responses, right? In recognizing that, so we have data. There's numbers. We have some sort of awareness where we're like, okay, we need to be more inclusive and diverse. It starts with pictures, but what we're talking about is the power to enact choice, right? And if we as a community don't start getting deeper with these conversations and what it actually looks like to be the beingness of diversity, we're going to continue to move societally on the surface. That surface looks like we have policy in the handbook, the employee handbook. It looks like, but the actual act of enacting justice becomes much more complex. What is our hope? Our hope is that you'll be willing not only to ask the questions, but dive deep into your personal assumptions and beliefs. The hope is that within that, you'll recognize that both and, personal and systemic, right? And that we won't shy away from doing the difficult work. What is the difficult work? Because sometimes I have conversations with folks that, what else are we supposed to do? Well, we do have one person of color, Angelique. Could you tell us what the Latino community is thinking and how they want? We open the doors. We're doing it, they just don't show up. And I'm like, give me 1 second, my eye's twitching. Second, let me support your evolution in that if the very letter, the very word of policies or assumptions or the silent things that go unspoken, the very energy that they hold, can I say that the very energy, y'all know what I'm talking about, because you can see some people in their body language. I'm extremely expressive, so that's just troublesome, right? You'll know what I'm thinking, right? And you'll see whether you feel welcomed or not, valued and accepted or not. So it's a very dangerous thing to assume that folks are diverse because they have the pictures. We should really be worried if the pictures are not represented. But then even if they do, we need to begin to ask real questions around what's the structure that supports the system in place. Is it really just that the people that we're talking about diversity and this entire, is it the idea that they don't want to be part of that group? How insane that assumption is. They don't want to be part of the conversation or don't want to enact change. It's a dangerous assumption. And so what we're talking about is both, and you see how it's both and? They're talking about like exactly what Stephanie said, the blessing and the shadow. It's like light and shadow simultaneously working together, which is why we can't address this with just, well, you know, I'm gonna hire that person, I'm gonna help them because, you know, they need help, and now we're inclusive and diverse. We have one woman, one person of color, and sometimes, you know, it's a woman of color. Right? And we really need to evaluate, and we need to be able to hold, like Stephanie said, the tension of this. And that begins with self-examination. This is really, really key and really important. The conditioning is so strong over years. I mean, y'all were doing the number thing, right? How old you are. And I'm probably gonna speak to like this half of the line, or more than half of the line. All those years of conditioning, living in a society that affirms the perception, where the media, that's why you have to be careful with it, affirms the perception, where the pictures, Mary Lee, you gotta help me because I don't know nothing about newspaper stuff or journalistic stuff, but it's like those big, what do they call when they put that stuff in big letters? Thank you. This is sad. That was sad.
Don't be ashamed. Don't be ashamed.
I'm not. Oh, no, it's early. Did I mention it's early? This is early for me, okay? This is not a joke. Right? The headline's bold to call attention to the group or to the situation happening. We need to do deeper work. And that deeper work begins, it's like the tip of the iceberg, with your own self-awareness. There's no way around it. It's messy, it's complicated, it's complex, it's multi-layered. There's no easy Band-Aid solution to it. And that's the truth. And as Stephanie said, there's this idea that if we, as communities, respect and honor the distinctions, right? She as an African-American woman, I as a Latina woman, and then Mary Lee as a white woman, honor the distinctions, our own work, and name that. And go back home and show up for it. And interrupt and go, You said this is really important, and it's on the last page. How is this possible? And your picture's what? 5 white men? I love people, from that space, so no angst toward the 5 white men. But it says a lot. And it's time that we start asking questions and are willing to be the interrupter. That's the work of an ally. It's being willing to interrupt the cycle, being willing to ask the hard question. Most of the time I hear, doing a lot of social justice work and anti-racism training, but I don't know what to say. Listen, silence will get you at some part of the line that may not be accurate. So it's expensive. It's expensive not to just ask what's on your mind and say, hey, have you considered this? But most times I hear, I don't want to be that person, whatever that person is. We all got to be careful with that. Whatever that person is. Whatever that person is. So thank you for sharing that, because it's really important, garnering the perspectives. And most people but we have First Thursday Latino. But we have,
For Latinos.
I'm sorry, yeah. But we have, we have a local chapter of the NAACP, but we have, and yet there are places where our boardrooms are still full of predominantly one ethnic group. And that would be white. So we have a lot of work to do, and that's the tension that we hold as advocates and activists in this work. It's like you show up for it every day, and then sometimes you gotta, some people have a glass of wine. I'm not a wine drinker, so that would probably look like Pepsi. Guilty, whatever, right? To be able to deal with the intensity of the work. But please, if anything, walk away knowing that we're working, we're showing up, and it takes an extraordinary amount of courage and boldness to stand out and interrupt the cycle. And that is just the beginning. Where do you see some key interventions or opportunities to address structures that would advance the movement toward equality?
Jessica mentioned this morning the work of the YWCA, and I had the honor of participating in a 3-day Racial Justice Institute training that was mind-blowing, life-forming, and it got to the very root and soul of this work. And it changed me as a Latina advocate and woman of color, friend, mother. It did just so many things for me as a person. So I recommend for all of you to consider the YWCA's Racial Justice Institute. It is a mind-blowing experience, and I promise you, you will walk away a different person once you have gone through it. So I'm grateful for what the YWCA stands for and what it does. And certainly it is a platform that we need desperately in this community. I am known as a troublemaker in this community, and I wear that badge with pride because it allows me to break down the doors for others to follow so that we can all be at the table. And you don't have to look far to look for opportunities to engage within our social justice environment. That there are those of us who are in this room and others who are missing. However, all you have to do is search and find and attend, show up. Angelique mentioned First Thursday Latino. It's so ironic that that initiative, that gathering was created 7 years ago after the fatal shooting of a Latino business owner on East King Street. And Norman Bristol Colon, who used to work for Governor Rendell, saw it fit to demand from our mayor and our police chief that we gather and talk about safety in the city. And what happened after that gathering was remarkable. Everyone started showing up. And so that's one example of how we all have the power to create many more networks and circles of conversation. It doesn't require big budgets or for a board to approve this or that. It requires us to come together and want to have these conversations. So there are things in existence where we can open the door for change and create for more boards of directors to look much more reflective of what our community is. Many more black and brown faces, many more women who have the capacity to offer their skills and their talents. We are sitting on the sidelines waiting to be invited in. And it's up to you and all of your friends to make that change.
One of the places that I'm so surprised, I'm an educator. That's what I do. I've been in school. I've been in a classroom all my life. I'm just now on the other side of the desk. And so I think the classroom is one of the places that I see the most potential and actual change happening. Potential for change and change actually happening. At the seminary, we train persons from all different forms of ministry. And so a lot of people, when there's a problem or when they need help or support, their community of faith is where they're going to turn. And so if I'm teaching a room full of faith leaders, that gives me access to several different communities. And so I think the classroom at the seminary is one of the places where I really see that work happening. But I also am very clear that a seminary is part of a larger education system. And I know that there have been some recent conversations in local schools that are happening around diversity towards, in terms of administration and also the teachers that are in the classroom, intentional conversations with young people around race and diversity, right? Instead of just saying, oh, such and such rides the bus with me and I noticed that they look a little different. I mean, like real deep engagement with our young people around matters of diversity and ethnicity and race and color and class, which quite honestly they may not be able to have at home, right? Like there are certain things, you talk about that wall of silence, there are certain things that children are experiencing that they know that they question, but they cannot question it at home. And so our classrooms become a significant site for transformation because it's a space apart from home sometimes where they can try on different ideas and identities. And then they can find out and be exposed. And so I think, our biggest thing is to pay attention, to show up, even if we're not quite clear on what somebody's going to be talking about, what they're going to be show up to the PTA meeting, stand up for diverse conversations, even if they make us uncomfortable. And that happens, I think, for our young people, but I know it also happens, at grad level. Our students are in class, and I know that from time to time, they're like, oh, here she comes with Black Lives Matter. You're right. Matter of fact, I'm thinking about the first day of class, wearing a Black Lives Matter t-shirt right up under my vest, underneath my blazer, because this is what time it is. So I think that the classroom is a primary site for where that activity is happening.
I would say that I agree in both situations. What Fran had to say and what Stephanie had to say. I took the Racial Justice Institute and actually plan to do it again in September. I did it 3 years ago, and it was in fact life-changing. It was incredible. And the YWCA also has a number of different racial justice and social justice programs. The other thing that I would say is mentoring programs. Both of our children went through the school district of Lancaster, and for a number of years I had a different student each year who wanted to be a writer, and each of the students was a person of color, and I met with the students each week, and in one case the girl wanted to be a newspaper reporter, but her family didn't get the paper. So I brought in the newspapers each week. I worked at Lancaster newspaper years ago and still had friends there, was able to make a connection for her that she was able to write for what was then called the freestyle section, the teen section, and then followed her through her first couple years at Millersville. So if there are ways in your whatever profession that you're in, if you can reach out to local schools and offer your services as a mentor, that can be very, very helpful on a one-on-one basis. And then I also would go into McCaskey and do seminars for students who thought they might want to be writers or do something in the English field. So reaching out to students and to school districts, particularly the school district of Lancaster and the inner city schools, can be very helpful to the district and to the students. So.
Want to take a deep breath with me? Feels like these conversations get weighty. And one of the reasons why they get weighty is because there is a lot of work to do, and it's not that simple. And shifting our mindset from the idea of charity, right? Like, I'm just going to go and support this in this way. What we want is solidarity. And it's this idea of moving past just the surface, right? What Marilee's speaking to is like this personal relationship, not as entertainment. Can I talk about that for a minute? Not as just, I want to know the food you eat. I mean, bless that. I have, food is good. Yeah, it's a good thing, right? It's how most cultures celebrate and get together. It's a great thing. Food is great. But taking the time to get to know each other, taking the time to hear, to listen for, rather than assume. No, well, you work, you do, you have, but really listen in for the story. And then share your challenge as well. Being able to hold the tension, the light and the shadow in those conversations for greater impact. As was said, you don't have to go far. Look at your own sphere of influence. What does that look like? What does the conversation look like? You're not sure? The YWCA. As a matter of fact, we have a training coming up this month. This month at the Lancaster Theological Seminary, the Anti-Racism Analysis Training. And they generally have some seats for community members. I don't know if they're full already, you can check. It's done twice a year, January and August. We also do study circles where we can kind of engage in this conversation and take it a little deeper, right? So there's plenty of opportunities, there's plenty of resources, but ultimately is the willingness to engage. Why Assests Lancaster? Why business as a tool for transformation? Because it's the opportunity to deconstruct and start from fresh, right? Like, you take systems that are already in place for so many years. I mean, it takes an incredible amount, and I'm glad to be part of the shift, even for Assests Lancaster that has a long history. I mean, 25, that's a long time. Yeah, y'all know it's a long time, right? But here comes this awesome opportunity with business to deconstruct and start it at a place that from the top to the bottom is equitable. As a matter of fact, there's no top bottom, there's like this plane moving across. Seeing every individual as an asset and a valuable member, co-creator of this business, right? And this is where we're getting excited, because there's this possibility to shift this. We don't have to accept the traditional form as the only way of movement, and that's what we're questioning. And unless you're willing to question that, we're going to have some issues, because the very systems that perpetuate the oppression are structured in a way that are quite unmovable. I don't know if we're still talking about education and access and education. It's 2015, and we're still having the same conversation, right? So it's like, how do we start creating change? How do we look outside the box? I get the box, it was part of a long, because I'm not trying to poke too much at that. But I want to challenge you to think again. I want to challenge you to look again. I want to challenge you to question, is there really opportunity for all? Are all voices at the table? Not only just the voices, but the power to enact change. That there is a choice. That it's moving past the surface. The courage to question. and speak. You know when you're in a room, in a meeting, and everybody's quiet, it's like an elephant in the room and nobody wants to say anything, and somebody just says something that everybody was like, and nobody wants to say anything because they don't want to be that person, whatever that person is. I want to encourage you that when that moment comes, we are all with you. Say something. The joke is no longer a joke. The assumption is no longer just an assumption. These things have power to create a practical reality that oppresses another individual. We're with you. As corny as that sounds, at that moment, we're all going to be behind you doing go, say it, interrupt it, mumble, bumble. It's okay. It's not perfect. But the courage to stand in that in-between and speak the unspoken can change so much and can empower another to transform their mindset that they've been conditioned with for the betterment of all of us. Because listen, the truth is, and it sounds very kumbaya, and I'm not a kumbaya person, but we are better together. We do need each other. As much as we need each other, we need to respect the distinctions. Because we are all coming from different places. And that's the truth. And that's to be honored and respected. And so what I'd like to do is take a couple of minutes, if you have any questions for the panelists, and we can rock that real quick.
Thanks for joining us in Opportunity for All by Assests Lancaster. Thanks to our sponsors, ERX Contracting and Solutions by Cat, marketing and advertising with passion. This has been For Your Info Podcast.